The Pacific is heating up. It started with words so sharp, they felt like a declaration. A senior Chinese diplomat publicly warned Japan, "The dirty head that sticks itself in must be cut off." These weren't whispers behind closed doors. This was a direct statement, on record, targeting the Prime Minister of Japan, Sanae Takaichi, the diplomat who said it was later removed from his position after global backlash. But the message remained. It revealed a truth Beijing doesn't hide anymore. China sees Japan as an obstacle, one that must be pushed aside. For decades, the waters between these two nations have been tense. But now, we're crossing from controlled tension into something far darker. And this time, it isn't only China and Japan, India, the United States, the entire Indo-Pacific. Every player is now entangled in the world's most volatile region. Today, we break down the full picture. Not speculation, not fantasy, just pure geopolitics, the military, the history, the alliances, and the growing pressure that could reshape the 21st century. Before missiles, before alliances, before modern power politics, the fire starts with a handful of uninhabited rocks. Japan calls them Senkaku. China calls them Diaoyu. To the world, they appear meaningless. To Beijing and Tokyo, they represent national pride and sovereign territory, strategic control over vital shipping lanes, resource wealth, specifically suggested oil and natural gas beneath the seabed, maritime dominance over the East China Sea, giving the possessor an advantage in projecting power. So why both claim the islands? Japan formally incorporated the islands in 1895, asserting they were terra nullius, nobody's land, at the time. After World War II, the US administered them as part of the Ryukyu Islands chain. In 1972, the United States returned administrative control to Japan under the Okinawa Reversion Agreement. Japan maintains continuous administrative control, a powerful legal and diplomatic argument. Whereas China cites historical records dating back to the Ming Dynasty, claiming use and discovery. Beijing argues the islands were administered as part of Taiwan before 1895. China also argues that Japan seized them illegitimately during a period of weakness following the First Sino-Japanese War. To understand why the dispute exploded, we have to go back to 1960s. In 1969. A UN study suggested the sea floor around the islands might contain significant oil and natural gas reserves. Suddenly, the islands mattered. Suddenly, both nations cared. And suddenly, the East China Sea became a chessboard of military patrols and diplomatic warnings. The economic incentive transformed the historical disagreement into an active geopolitical flashpoint. Modern China is not the China of the 1990s. Its rapid military modernization has given it a new, assertive posture. It now fields the world's largest navy by ship count, the People's Liberation Army Navy, the PLAN, a powerful, modernizing air force, including stealth aircraft like the J-20, massive Coast Guard cutters, some larger and more heavily armed than the destroyers of smaller nations, advanced anti-ship ballistic missiles, ASBMs, designed specifically to counter Japan, and US aircraft carriers, often called carrier killers. A political leadership willing to openly project power into disputed territories. China's strategy is called grayzone pressure, not war, not peace, something in between. Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels enter Japanese waters around Senkaku almost weekly. Chinese fighter jets cross into Japanese Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ zones, forcing Japan to scramble fighters hundreds of times every year. Beijing's goal is simple: normalize its presence. Wear Japan down, make the abnormal normal. China used this exact strategy in the South China Sea, building artificial islands and militarizing them. And it worked. Japan knows the pattern. Japan has seen this movie before, and Japan refuses to let it happen again. Before we continue, if you're finding this breakdown of global flashpoints insightful and value-independent, in-depth analysis of geopolitics, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's the single best way to support our work and ensure we can continue to bring you clear, accurate reporting on the world's most complex issues. What specific factor do you think is the biggest driver of tensions right now? Territory, history, or resources? Let us know. In the comments below, the China-Japan rivalry is not new. Its roots dig deep into the 20th century, into a chapter of history China will never forget. In 1937, Imperial Japan invaded Nanjing. For 6 weeks, Japanese forces carried out mass killings, executions, and atrocities across the city. Historians estimate that over 100,000 Chinese civilians and prisoners of war were killed. This event, known as the Nanjing Massacre, or the Rape of Nanjing, still shapes Chinese national identity today. Whenever tensions rise with Japan, Chinese media, Chinese textbooks, and Chinese officials bring up this painful past. China perceives Japan's official reluctance to issue unqualified apologies or fully acknowledge its historical conduct as an enduring insult. To China, Japan's growing military strength feels like a historical nightmare returning. To Japan, China's rise feels like a new threat, replacing an old one. This history fuels everything happening today. Asia's most underestimated rivalry is not China versus Japan, it is China versus India. They share a border thousands of kilometers long, much of it disputed. The undefined boundary is known as the Line of Actual Control, the LAC. In 2020, the conflict turned deadly at the Galwan Valley. A brutal hand-to-hand battle left soldiers from both nations dead. No guns, no artillery, just iron rods, rocks, and raw violence. The result, India's perception of China changed forever, moving the relationship from cautious competition to open hostility. Recently, the tensions spilled outside the battlefield. An Indian girl from Arunachal Pradesh, traveling abroad, was detained at a Chinese airport. Why? Because her Indian passport listed Arunachal Pradesh as part of India, and China claims the entire state as South Tibet or Zangnan. Chinese authorities called her passport invalid. They refused entry and briefly held her for questioning, before eventually sending her back. This small incident revealed a much bigger truth. China doesn't just challenge India on the border, it challenges India's very identity and international standing. Arunachal Pradesh is legally and internationally recognized as Indian territory. But Beijing's refusal to accept this continues to inflame tensions. Since Galwan, India has deployed tens of thousands of troops to the Himalayas, blocked Chinese investments, and restricted hundreds of Chinese mobile apps, strengthened military ties with the US, Japan, and Australia, the Quad, accelerated its domestic missile programs and border infrastructure projects, become a major Indo-Pacific power. With increasing naval focus, India's rivalry with China directly affects Japan, because the more India pushes back on land in the Himalayas, the more China is incentivized to push east toward Japan and the sea to relieve pressure and demonstrate strength. China fears one thing, above all, being encircled, and the Japan-India partnership does exactly that. By extending their strategic ties across the Asian landmass and maritime domain, they help form a democratic counterweight to China's power. These two democracies are now deeply linked in defense cooperation. Dharma Guardian, joint army exercises focused on counter-terrorism and mountain warfare. JIMEX, Japan-India Maritime Exercise, advanced naval drills in the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean. Shared concerns about Chinese expansionism, debt trap diplomacy, and disregard for international maritime law. Japan invests billions in India's railways, ports and infrastructure development, particularly in the strategically vital Northeast. India buys Japanese equipment and technology and participates in joint production. And most importantly, both nations openly oppose unilateral changes to regional borders. A message clearly aimed at China. Washington isn't watching from the sidelines. The US-Japan military partnership is the strongest it has been since the World War II, and is pivoting from purely defensive to a posture that includes integrated deterrence and counter-strike capability. The US is stationing advanced unmanned aerial systems, drones like the MQ-9B Sea Guardian, in Japan, expanding joint missile defense systems, including the Aegis-based network, integrating Japan into US naval operations and intelligence sharing networks, increasing rotational deployments of US Marines, shifting capabilities to smaller, more distributed bases across the island chains, conducting record-high joint exercises across all domains: land, sea, air, space, and cyber. Japan is undergoing a military transformation unseen since the end of World War II, officially raising its defense spending to a goal of 2% of GDP by 2027. It is investing hundreds of billions of dollars to acquire genuine counter-strike capability, meaning the ability to hit enemy launch sites. This includes F-35 stealth fighters, acquiring over 100 jets, including the F-35B, to operate from its refitted flat-top destroyers, Izumo and Kaga, effectively turning them into aircraft carriers. Tomahawk cruise missiles. Japan has signed a major deal to acquire up to 400 of these long-range land attack missiles, which will be equipped on its Aegis-class destroyers. Aegis missile defense destroyers, continuing to upgrade and build new ones. Domestically developed missiles, accelerating the improved Type 12, extending its range to over 900 kilometers, with plans to reach 1,500 kilometers. Hypersonic weapons, investing in domestic hypersonic glide weapons. Japan is no longer limited to strictly self-defense. It is developing the ability to strike back at the source of an attack. This shift is monumental, and Beijing knows it. The tension between China and Japan is not isolated. It is increasingly influenced by Beijing's partners, Russia and North Korea. A strategic triangle of convenience has emerged. Russia and China routinely conduct joint exercises and patrols near Japanese territory, a clear political signal to Tokyo and Washington. Russia's presence forces Japan to split attention. Moscow has become increasingly reliant on Beijing's support, aligning them against the US-led order. North Korea is missile testing as leverage. Every launch distracts and drains Japan. Pyongyang keeps US and Japanese forces tied down. North Korea's program accelerates Japan's rearmament, giving Tokyo justification for capabilities that also shift the balance. With China, this partnership amplifies the sense of encirclement, fueling the arms buildup across the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific is a pressure cooker. Japan and China, locked in a territorial dispute. India and China, locked in a border dispute. The US, reinforcing Japan. Japan, rearming at historic speed. China, pushing harder than ever. Russia and North Korea, complicating the landscape. And the past, from Nanjing to Galwan to Senkaku, still casts a long shadow. A single clash, at sea or on the border, could trigger a chain reaction, one that involves every major power in Asia, and could quickly escalate beyond the initial combatants. 3 trends will shape the future. 1. Japan will continue to build offensive capability, not to start a war, but to achieve deterrence by punishment, making conflict too expensive for Beijing or Pyongyang. 2. India will play a central balancing role, the only major Asian land power that can check China on land and collaborate with Japan and the US at sea. 3. China will not back down. Beijing sees its claims as existential core interests. The pressure will only increase. The East China Sea looks calm, still, almost peaceful. But beneath that calm surface, pressure rises. China, rising and assertive. Japan, rearmed and determined. India, watching from the Himalayas. The US, strengthening alliances. Russia and North Korea, aligning for convenience. A region where history bleeds into the present, and the present shapes the future. As we watch these waters, one thing becomes clear. This is not a dispute over uninhabited islands. This is a test of power, a test of resolve, a test of the Indo-Pacific's future. So what do you think of Japan's recent military buildup includes acquiring the Tomahawk cruise missile? In a potential conflict scenario, what kind of mainland targets would Japan likely prioritize with this new counter-strike capability? Drop your comments as I read everyone. And if you want deeper analysis on global tensions like this, stay with us. Hit that like button right now and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive. Your support ensures these complex stories are told with accuracy, depth, and clarity, because in a world where conflict brews below the surface, knowledge is defense, and defense is survival. This is the Defense Archives.